All right, guys, so this is Strand 3. This is actually the first standard in Strand 3. So getting full on into injuries right here. So we'll start with this. There's a picture in the next slide that's disturbing. So that was your warning. So clickety clack. Okay, we're going to start with acute injuries. So the good news about sports med is like we've talked about these things throughout a little bit. So hopefully this is starting, like we've hit it multiple times. So hopefully you're starting to get like, oh, I remember this stuff. So I have it in my notes that this is one of the PowerPoints we need to go over. And hopefully I'm not on repeat here. So I'm not sure what happened to his thumb, but we could clearly define the time that it happened. So let's say that he decided to, like, his banana got stuck in his blender or something. I don't know what happened to his hand, but we'll pretend like he's like, oh, the banana, and he maybe pushed it in or something. We'll pretend like he blended his hand. That's not what happened, but in my cartoon scenario, that's what I came up with. So we could pinpoint a time when he sticks his hand in the blender. That's such a stupid scenario, sorry. So maybe a better one. Utah's pretty famous for getting the snow that we get. So I know I've talked to this about this before, but they have issues like if snow blower gets stuck, sometimes people will punch at the snow, and if they punch and the snow gives, their hand will kind of be taken by this snow blower. So maybe this is a lawnmower, maybe a snowblower, but what the point is with an acute injury is you can pinpoint it back to a set time. So you could say it was when I stuck my hand in the machine. It's not something that you can go like, I've had soreness over time. You can say my thumb was intact and I stuck it in a machine. So it's characterized by sudden onset. The sudden onset would be like the blades going to his thumb. And basically, yeah, you could give it a timeline. It happened exactly here. Okay, so here are some examples of acute injuries. So in the case, I'm going to kind of wiggle my mouse over it when I talk about each one. So a sprained ankle. This is an inversion sprain, and you can tell because the bruising's on the lateral side of the ankle. So maybe this person went in for a layup and landed on someone's foot. That happens a lot in basketball or volleyball. If they cross the line, maybe they're going up for a block, they cross the line and land on an opposite person's foot. That's not okay in volleyball, but it happens sometimes. If that's the case and his foot, if his foot, so this is big toe all the way to pinky toe, if his foot goes like this too hard, then at risk we've got the calcaneofibular ligament here, there's the anterior talofibular, there's the posterior talofibular. And so if it's a high ankle sprain, which this one looks like it probably could be a high ankle sprain, the anterior tibiofibular, or the posterior talofibular. So this, we could say he was playing basketball, landed on a foot funny, at set time the injury happened. This is a hamstring strain. So we're seeing the bruising after the fact. So it's not like it would immediately bruise, which I'm sure you guys are smart enough to know that. So with this bruising, what happened is probably they started cold, because remember the rubber band analogy. If it's warm, the rubber band will stretch. If you stick that rubber band in a freezer and you try to stretch it, it's gonna break. Same thing with your muscles and your soft tissue. So in this case, probably one of his hamstring muscles was compromised, and we could pinpoint an exact time. Well, it was a weekend game. I took off sprinting to first base and I heard a pop. Okay, that a lot of times is what happens. This is a torn ACL. So remember, if you plant and twist, things at risk are going to be your ACL. Well, really all of the ligaments of the knee could be at risk if it's a strong enough force, especially if your foot's in kind of a vise. So if you ended up, like, say you're hiking and you end up stepping between two rocks and then twisting, if you're in a vise, you could tear a lot of things. So yeah, so he might have stopped, rotated, and then took out his ACL. So that's an acute injury. There's a sudden onset. You can pinpoint it right back to the same time, usually associated with a lot of pain. Okay, contrast acute with chronic. So with chronic injuries, this could be like maybe you played volleyball in high school. Maybe you played baseball in high school. And now you're, let's just go fast forward. Now we're 20 years from now. And you can say, I can remember I used to play this sport and I would get some soreness there, but it would go away. Volleyball players are always kind of extending through their low back, so they tend to get low back injuries. Baseball players, especially the throwers, tend to have rotator cuff issues. So if it gets to where it's uncomfortable, but you can't really pinpoint it back to this date is when it happened, it's going to be like gradual overuse over time. So not just it happened here, it's gradual use over time. So sometimes they can be biomechanical issues. So if you look at this person's feet, they're very flat-footed. So if we were to actually do an impression of the bottom of their foot, we'd be like, oh, there's the entire foot. So you can see she's off at the base, which means she's off at the ankle. And if you follow this all the way up, because the sole of her foot is essentially pointing out, what we have here is a valgus deviation up higher. So it can be because you have improper form or technique. It can be because maybe you are flat-footed to begin with, so maybe you need some kind of an insert to protect from that. But yeah, a lot of times we need to look at the biomechanical issues and try to address those, because if we fix it and they're still standing the wrong way, like hyperpronation in this case, then we need to address it with inserts. We need to maybe have them see a podiatrist and get some recommendations. So here are some examples of chronic injuries: Achilles tendonitis, jumper's knee, patellar tendonitis, shin splints. So those runners, you get those a lot. This is Osgood Schlatter's that you're seeing here. That typically goes away as a young person gets older. But it's not like we can go, my Achilles tendonitis happened here. And we go, it hurts, and then sometimes it doesn't, and then it hurts again, and then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just chronic, all the time pain. That's probably worst case scenario for a chronic injury. Okay, so our body has this great battle whenever there's inflammation in the body. So inflammation can happen by stepping on a rusty, poopy nail.
No.
You got bacteria sort of entering, there's an injury, and your body will go, oh, we've got to go attack this, whatever is foreign in our body. So sometimes it can be because if we roll an ankle, so again, this is the foot, roll an ankle, we've torn everything here. So if you remember from probably biology, maybe even probably seventh grade science, you go like, what's the organization of life? It goes cells, group of cells together make a tissue, group of tissues together make an organ, group of organs together make an organ system, group of organ systems together. Well, that's you.
Hooray!
So in this case, with inflammation, what your body does is, if you've rolled it, these tissues over here, organ level, are ruptured. So some cells will break open. Those cells will cause inflammation because we have all the stuff that's inside those cells that have been damaged kind of coming out of the cells. And then the cells that are still intact, now we've got a bunch of solutes surrounding those cells. And because of osmosis, if there are more solutes outside of the cell, I always think of it as salts suck or solutes suck, and they'll actually start to grab stuff out of the secondary cells, and you'll start with initial cell death and then follow it with secondary cell death. I'm going to include a Khan Academy video today because I want you to really be solid on inflammation. Okay, so is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? So that's the big debate. So remember, it's always been rice. So we automatically go control for inflammation. So we go rest, that's going to control for inflammation, ice, compress, elevate. Well, new data is suggesting that maybe we're controlling for inflammation too much, and we need to allow some inflammation to occur because maybe we could get back to normal sooner. That's not to say that we should do away with rice completely, but rice was based on some studies done in like the 60s, and some PTs today are starting to go, I don't know that that was the end all be all answer for everything. So look for that to continue to change. Also, maybe look up the acronym peace and love, because that's kind of a new direction that PT is going towards, and I'll include that on here or something like that. Okay, so the goal of sports medicine is to limit the adverse effects of inflammation. So with inflammation, we're going to get multiple things. So in the acute phase, we have the primary cell death, like I talked about, and these tissues have blood vessels which bring oxygen and nutrients to the tissues. So a capillary will sort of spread out, and we'll be able to get some white blood cells into the area, some nutrients to the area, and when the blood vessels, let's say that they rolled their ankle and some of the blood vessels also ruptured, since they're not intact, normal blood flow to cells is disrupted, and so they don't necessarily get all the nutrients and oxygen that they need, as well as the initial tearing apart of cells and other cells sort of responding to that. So cell death as a result of lack of oxygen is hypoxia. So hypoxia just means low oxygen, and it's characterized by a general increase in blood flow, bringing blood cells and chemicals that clean up cellular debris. So if we had kind of the skin intact, and let's say we have a nail go through, the initial nail going through would kill cells, and those cells, whatever was inside it, think of the Golgi apparatus, then the nucleus, the mitochondria, all the things that are inside a cell are now outside the cell, and then again, solutes are outside the cell. The other cells start to lose the cellular material inside it. The intracellular stuff becomes extracellular stuff. So the signs and symptoms that follow is it's going to be warm. And the reason why is we've increased our blood flow to the area. Our blood vessels have vasodilated, which means they've gotten bigger, so we can get more blood flow there. And that will result in heat. So the area will be warm. Redness will also occur, just because it's associated with the blood, increased blood flow. And we get swelling. So the swelling is again going to be from the initial trauma where blood vessels and cells rupture. And then the second part is going to be fluid is lost to the extracellular compartment from secondary cells that weren't initially injured. Okay, so we have cellular debris in the extracellular fluid, which causes osmosis from the secondary cells, just kind of leaking out fluid based on that whole idea of solutes suck or salts suck. We have blood vessels that vasodilate. Think of capillaries. Capillaries will dilate, and the whole idea is to bring extra stuff to that area. Stuff being white blood cells, oxygen, nutrients, trying to help out, and they're trying to also clean up waste that's there. Okay, so again, because we have initial cell death, secondary cell death is likely to follow just because of the extra debris in the extracellular space. And then for that, we can use compression, and we can do essentially rest, ice, compression, elevation to minimize those characteristics that happen to people with injuries. Okay, pain is also associated with inflammation. It can become swollen, and it's triggered by a couple of things. So one is that there's the initial trauma of, well, you've torn something, or you've penetrated something with like a nail, so the poopy nail example, and also because we've got extra chemicals. Some of it's like mast cells will release histamine, and there are just all kinds of extra chemicals happening because your body went, oh, danger, danger, alert, alert, and just all kinds of stuff is entering that area, causing a lot of swelling. Okay, in my intro class, if you had it, we talked about the little girl who didn't have pain signals. So pain is actually a gift. So pain will tell you, stop using this part of your body. There's something wrong with it. So when you have pain, you need to listen to your body. We need to go ahead and rest it at the very least, and maybe even go through the steps of rice just to control for inflammation initially. And finally, we have loss of function. So look how sad he is on his little crutches on the sidelines. You have to listen to your body. So the acute phase of an injury is usually 2 to 3 days, or 48 to 72 hours. And if your body is telling you there's pain here, maybe it's deformed because we've got all kinds of swelling happening, then that's when you have to go, okay, nothing else. We have to just rest it before we go throw us back into a game. So we're going to stop there today, and we'll continue with this next time. Hope you're good. Remember, announcements on Canvas. I feel like I've said that a billion times, but I'm still missing like 5 or 6 kids from each class. I get emails every day that's like, where do I find stuff? Announcements on Canvas. Thanks.